between Palm Sunday with its hosannas and Easter with its hallelujahs comes Good Friday. There may be some celebrating going on in Jerusalem, but it's not by the people who call themselves Jesus' disciples, whether they were part of the original band of 12 or whether they were followers who were drawn to his message. For them and the man that they called Master, this day was anything but good. Only with the hindsight of Easter can we see that what was evil could become good. That's why, in order to fully appreciate and celebrate Easter, the day of resurrection, it is important to spend at least a little time in the darkness of the days that precede it. Would you join me in the call to worship? We follow Christ.
Take up your cross.
We follow Christ.
Bid us come and offer our lives.
We follow Christ.
Summons us to new life.
Come, let us worship our Creator.
Our first reading is from Mark chapter 14, verses 12 through 20. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, The teacher asks, "Where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?" He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." So the disciples set out and went to the city and found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he came with the 12, and when they had taken their places and were eating, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They began to be distressed and to say to him one after another, "Surely not I." He said to them, "It is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the bowl with me."
In the last days of his life, Jesus gathered around to have a meal with friends, like he did throughout his life. But on this final meal, Jesus took time to break the bread and to pass the cup, saying, later we hear that this is his body and his blood. We, as a way of entering this story to this day, share symbolically this meal with Christ. We break the bread and we pass the cup to remember the sacrifice Christ had for us. And tonight, as we walk through this story together, we take this meal as disciples of Christ. Alongside those 12, he had this meal so long ago. So I invite you to please come up and share communion with us. We'll be serving it by intinction, which is just a fancy word to mean that if you will just tear off some bread, you can dip it into the cup and then take it and eat it then up here. So if you would please gather again in the middle aisle and come up and share communion with us. I encourage us now, as we've shared this communion together, to continue in Scripture and in song, on this journey with the disciples through Christ's final day.
Hymn 323. Come, ye sinners, poor and needy.
After they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that, if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you stay awake for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough! The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer."
Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and then lead him away under guard." So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to them, "Have you come out of the swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple, teaching, and you did not arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled. All of them deserted him and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all of the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes were assembled. Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards, warming himself at the fire.
While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I do not know or understand what you are talking about." And he went out into the forecourt. Then a cock crowed. And the servant girl, on seeing him, began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. Then after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know this man you are talking about." At that moment the cock crowed for the second time. Then Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept.
Very early in the morning, the chief priests, with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin, reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Now it was a custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the prison requested. People requested. A man named Broadus was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing that it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the King of the Jews?" Pilate asked him. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them, and he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
We have been journeying through Lent. We have come from Palm Sunday through Holy Week, Maundy, Thursday, and have ended now on Good Friday. And there's a question that always comes in my mind of why do we take this time to commemorate such a hard and dark event? And I think there are many answers to this. One in particular I've been thinking about lately is that on Good Friday we come to remember this dark time in Jesus' life. Because the hard truth is that dark days are a part of the story. Dark days might not be the whole story, but they are part of it. So today we remember. We remember the day when evil tried to put out the light of Christ. Christ came to love all those he saw. The light his love produced was great. It was good news to the poor, the captive, and everyone in between. But as this light shone brightly forth, it also threatened those. It threatened the political and religious leaders of his day. It threatened those who were happy in the darkness. And it threatened the darkness itself. So we remember the day that the darkness tried to put out the light. And for a day, for a moment in time, it seems like the darkness had succeeded. It seemed that the darkness that we see in the world around us, and if we're honest, we sometimes see in ourselves, had appeared to win that day. The tendency, I think, for us is to want to skip ahead in the story. But as I encouraged you at the beginning of Holy Week and encourage you now, I hope you can sit in this part of the story for a little while. I hope you can sit in this dark day. I hope you can see that dark days are a part of the story, and I hope we can mourn that fact. But I also hope we can marvel that even in the dark days, we see the example of the love of Christ. The same love that not only that threatened the political and religious figures, the same love that brought light, that threatened the darkness, is also a love on display during this day. That Jesus Christ, the one who is all God and all man, who had angels at his command, chose not to lash out, to hurt others, but instead chose the path to confront the darkness by giving of his very self. It was ultimately an act of deep love, an act that saw a path forward by self-sacrifice. So, today I hope that we can sit in Good Friday. We can pray and think about what it means for our lives. But I also hope that we can continue on in the story and see what's next. So as our next readings come, please sit in this moment, but also remember the love that it shows.
And they crucified him, and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified 2 bandits, one on his right and one on his left.
When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he is calling for Elijah." And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come down to take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was God's son."
Since we're celebrating Valentine's Day, I've got a special piece to start out with entitled My Funny Valentine. And I think you'll recognize it when you hear it. So. My next selection is going to be something entirely different. It's the theme song from a movie entitled The High and the Mighty, featuring John Wayne. Have any of you seen that movie? It's been quite a while back that it was playing, but I think this is the only movie John Wayne's ever played in when he didn't play a Western role, because we always think of him as being a cowboy. But he was flying a large commercial plane into Chicago in this movie. And they were having problems, and they didn't know if they were going to be able to land. And so you can imagine the tension that was going on as they were going into Chicago. And this movie, this song from this movie entitled The High and the Mighty, I think you'll feel some of that fear. The other thing I would like to say is that I had a personal contact with John Wayne one time. Very, very impromptu, but I can tell you he's a very friendly man and loves to talk to people. My daughter and I had driven to Lone Pine, California from San Diego, where we lived. We were to pick up my husband and his friend who had been hiking for two weeks in the mountains, and they were coming down the next day. And so Catherine and I drove up to Lone Pine, and as I checked in the motel, I saw all of these women out there. And I said to the lady there at the desk, I said, "What's going on? All of these people have gathered around." Well, she said, "John Wayne is in town to make a movie. And he's up right now talking to all the people in town. they just love him here because every time he comes into town to make a movie, he goes around and sees everybody. And so that was kind of nice to learn. And so Catherine and I went back to our rooms, and pretty soon we saw him coming. And she said, and his room is just 2 doors down from yours. So, boy, we ran and took our suitcases and tossed them on the bed and got out a couple of Cokes to kind of sit and sip, trying to look casual as we were sitting there on our little stoop. Well, here he comes. Clump, clump, clump. And I honestly was so nervous. I couldn't even look up. And he stopped. And he says, well, hello. And the only thing I could think of to say was, well, hello, which wasn't very good. But anyway, he figured these women aren't going to be any fun to visit with, so he clomps on down to his room. And I said, boy, I sure blew it. I was so mad at myself. Well, the next morning, we were checking out. We were going to pick up my husband, who had been hiking over the mountains for 2 weeks with his friend. And I spotted John Wayne across the highway with his manager. And I thought, I'm going to be brave enough to go over and see if I can get a picture of him. So I went over and asked his manager if I could take a picture of John Wayne. And he said, you go get in the picture with him, and I'll take your picture. So I went over and stood by John Wayne, put his arm around me, and I put my arm around him, and he's so big I could hardly get my arm around him. But anyway, I had a wonderful picture taken, and I was going to bring it tonight, and then I went off and forgot it. So anyway, you'll have to take my word for it. I really did have my picture taken with John Wayne, and I have so much respect for him, while he was still alive and still now too. And the funny thing was, when we went to pick up my husband and his friend, they were so excited that we had met him, and my husband says, well, did you think to tell him that I was born in the same town that he was born in Iowa? Which he was. My husband was born in the same town in Iowa that John Wayne was born in. And so that was kind of, I said, no, I couldn't think of anything to say. So I was really tongue-tied. Anyway, that was my connection with John Wayne. And so I'd like to play this movie, The High and the Mighty, which is about him coming into Chicago. I've said that, haven't I? And so you can visualize him flying the plane into Chicago into this stormy weather.